Hey, welcome back. This is Yvonne Wakefield. I'll be reading the 4th chapter from this series of books, Babe in the Woods. This will bring you up to when I bought the land, and I was talking about before the real estate transaction resolved, I was staying on the land making sketches. These are like repetograph pen sketches. Probably none of you know what repetograph pens are now. They're these pens you had to charge with ink. Anyway, here are some of the sketches I talk about in chapter 3. So we're going to get into chapter 4. I leave the property and I don't have $3,500 for the final payment. So I go back to Minnesota where my grandfather is, and we play a game of cribbage. Chapter 4, what Patty shot at. Show me your cards. Put them down so I can see them. My grandfather looks at my hands, takes a slurp of bourbon, and places the tumbler beside some Kodak pictures. Eager to tell him about my land, I've stopped by his house in White Bear Lake, only days after sealing a deal in a city named after a dead Kentucky trapper. That would be John Day. Your count. Age and whiskey have diminished his sentences, but when a cribbage board is in front of him, my grandfather is solid, sharp, and single-minded. 9 years before, on the afternoon my father was buried, my grandfather poured the usual, sat me down at his dining room table, and taught me how to play cribbage. He was an honest player, had a nose for the game or because of the game, and took the points I missed. He never let anyone win by default, not even a kid. Put your cards where I can see them, he repeats. He's been saying that to me for half of my life. I lay my hand down and count. 15-2, 15-4, 6-8, and a Paris 10. Damn it to hell! He folds the card fan in his hand and slaps it onto the table. I got what Patty shot at. Instead of pegging, he shuffles into the kitchen to top off his drink. Between deals, I show him photographs I've taken of my land, tell him about the log cabin I plan to build there. If he thought I had my head in the clouds, he would tell me so, but he doesn't. I tell him about the $3,500 promissory note. He doesn't say a word. We are 1-on-1 into a 3-round set. The first person to win the next game takes nearly $1 worth of change. Want to sweeten the pot? My terms. He puts his hand over the pile of coins between us. Okay. You can afford to lose $1, I reply, stacking up my photographs. I don't mean the pot. I mean what you owe on the land you just bought. He keeps his hand over the money. If you win, I'll give you $3,500. If you lose, you give me $3,500. He is dead serious. We both know we'll stick to our promise. I've never asked him for money before, but if I had, he'd probably give it to me. Instead, I accept the challenge and hope I'll beat the 50-50 odds. It's a quiet game. There's no ante, no penny a point. My grandfather drains his bourbon, doesn't get up for a refill. I'll take those too, he says, after I pegged and missed counting a 15-4. Photographs of my dead grandmother hang on the side wall, keeping an eye on the house as my grandfather deals what appears to be the last hand in this game. Our pegs are neck and neck. He has the crib. I have first count, though. 15-2, 15-4, 6-8, and a double run for 16. I count 24 and just peg out. Damn it to hell! My grandfather pushes away from the table and wobbles into the den. I hear a low, lingering, deep-bellied belch and a rat-a-tat fart. The opening then closing of a desk drawer. He shuffles back to the table. Here. He huffs and hands me a check for $3,500. Here. I hand him a snap of a baby bird. My plan is to stay in Minnesota and return to Oregon in April and begin building the cabin. After paying off the promissory note, I feel more secure now than I actually full out, downright own those 80 acres. I'm still clear I want to build a log cabin, just not so sure how I'm going to do it. Then there are things to tie up and cut loose in Minnesota before I can go to Oregon. I enroll in college and move in with my foster mother. I'd been placed in her care when I was 15 and starving for love and security. I clamped down on any affection offered to me like a junkyard dog launching onto a scrapyard bone. Now legally an adult at 18, on the verge of building my own home, I still react like a hungry hound, wag my tail at any friendly hand. She had invited me to live with her when I returned from Oregon after she divorced my foster father, and is in that relationship she continues to manipulate the tired, poor, homeless masses in her job as a Social Security worker, in and out of the office. Nonetheless, sharing an apartment with her is the closest thing I have to call home, and I need one until I can build my own. The monthly Social Security benefits I received as a ward of the state would have ended unless I was enrolled as a full-time student. This was just enough to cover tuition and another reason to move back in with a foster mother, cheap as the rent. An annual payment from my mother's side of the trust went to pay my attorney. Every other cent I saved for went to the cabin. From September to April, I juggled college credits alongside a work-study job to help defray expenses. At night, I worked on my cabin plans, setting aside tools I buy at flea markets. I assess my possessions and decide what to take and what to store when I leave for Oregon. There is excess baggage, feelings about who I am in a relationship to a foster mother who extended affection I lapped up when I was too young, vulnerable, and broken to realize her outstretched hand held a twisted brand of motherly love. Taking on double credits and studying, I'm still too dumb to walk away from being a pet. In between art, literature, biology, English, and women's studies classes, I study up on how to live simply off the land with the foster mother looking over my shoulder. I read books by Helen and Scott Nearier. Check out back issues of Mother Earth News at the college library and buy a book on how to build a cabin. That book says to cut trees in the spring before the sap gets runny. In late April, I arranged to continue my college studies remotely, pioneering the concept of university without walls. Assignments will be mailed to respective instructors who hand me syllabi and encouragement along with questioning looks when I tell them how and where I will pursue my lessons that spring quarter. I tell the foster mother what she does not want to hear. Leave me alone. I am a sap. What I don't pack in the Gremlin, remember that little AMC car? I put into heated storage along with tailings mined from my lost homes. Like the summer before, a coffee thermos and a notebook are written and within reach of the driver's seat, and the back is filled with camping gear. This trip, though, includes tools I will need to use to build, ink drawings of them were included in the How to Build a Log Cabin book. These include an axe, a hatchet, chisels, a draw knife, a metal felling wedge, and a how-to and a bow saw. I substituted for the one-man crosscut saw in the book. In late April 1, I drive west through snow-white cornfields and mountain passes with avalanche dangers. The land I bought the August before is not the land I returned to 8 months later. Shin-high snow covers the mountainside and the creek is frozen. Until the cabin is built, I plan to sleep in a pup tent on land I bought when the temperature was hot enough to fry my backbone and bake sweet vanilla smells out of ponderosa pine. I knew there would be early spring snow, just not how much of it. Now the air is steeled as the ground blankets under my feet. I park the gremlin in the meadow beyond the green metal gate and fill a red nylon metal frame pack with essentials. A hand-cranked pencil sharpener nestles against an aluminum coffee pot, cast iron skillet, 12-pound Dutch oven, poetry volumes, sketchbook, colored pencils, watercolors, hatchet, long underwear, and whatever else I might need to use on this mountainside. On my virgin voyage, the pack is so heavy, I must hoist it up onto the driver's seat to jostle into the straps in order to adapt it to my body, spent. What I cannot fit in the pack is cached in a footlocker and left in the car. I carry the bow saw. The pack weighs about half as much as me. At 100 pounds, my body is still developing along with my common sense. Though my body still plateaus, common sense will forever continue to grow as I stagger under a load of things I think I need to survive. The really heavy stuff is stowed in the back of my mind. Icy steel seeps through thick leather choppers, and I toss the bow saw from hand to hand, sometimes attempting to twirl it like a baton as I march along. My boots squeak with every step, my eyes tear in bright cold. If there were an antler or whalebone in my pack, I would carve in slits, fashion goggles, and lash them around my eyes, like I read the Inuits did. Eye protection was not even on the list of what I needed to survive here. I squint to avoid blinding snow. Trudging up the mountain, I work up a sweat under 2 shirts, a sweater, and a cadmium red REI down parker matching the color of my pack. Air and ice have the same smell, sharp as tent stakes. I take a deep breath and exhale little clouds like balloons that float above the trail I'm cutting boot by boot. It takes nearly 2 hours to hike the same distance I'd covered in 45 minutes the summer before. The flat spot near the creek is familiar even under snow. The branch where a baby bird once sat is now a snow clump. Hammering with the blunt end of the hatchet, I stake out my tent over a tarp beside the frozen pool. With the sharp end, I hack off dead tree limbs, chop a hole in the pool, draw out a coffee pot filled with ice skim. Over a peevish fire, the water heats and flames, the only flicker when I need a roar. Darkness comes before the water boils hard enough to dissolve Lipton's noodle soup. I suck dehydrated pinches of broth and crunch uncooked pasta shards, sip tepid water into the mixing bowl of my cut. My frosty breath and the only Good night, dear. I zip into my tent. My sleeping bag is supposed to be good for 30 below. The flashlight batteries aren't as guaranteed. They snicker and die. A good thing, really, because my fingers need a respite from frostbite as I read A Coverless Walden by flashlight. An hour later, I wake up thirsty and having to pee. I groggily remember where I am and how I got here, and then realize I'm more familiar with the darkness inside me than the darkness outside the tent. I pull on a pair of old snowmobile boots, open the tent flap, and stand outside, awakening a loneliness that's been howling in my bones since the night my mother died, and I dreamed this land minus cold and snow. I knew before I was told she died that my mother was dead. Dreary stuff had told me so, but my mother was an optimist, or pretended to be one, assuring me die, dead, or dealt with death would never become part of my vocabulary, linked to the last living parent I had. She would survive open heart surgery, she said. Surgeons gave her a 50-50 chance, and she figured on beating the odds. But I was a prescient 14-year-old teenager and knew that everything, knew grass, trees, and sky, never lied. While she was in a St. Paul hospital operated on, I took a walk in a frozen swamp. Nearly 30 below degrees that day. It was crystal clear and my nostrils froze shut on the inhale. Tears pooled in the corners of my eyes and froze like diamonds. A low post-solstice sun glared back, not a leaf on a tree. Just vein thin black branches scratching up the blue yonder. A timid wind quivered, tufts of swamp grass and cattails dried golden. And the livelier, the brightest, the most counterpoint in sight was the cattails. And that got me to thinking, even in the death of winter, there is life. Then I thought, I'm freezing my ass out here. As a 14-year-old, my metaphors were as undeveloped as my common sense. Even it were one or two perched in a branch or a skeletal tree, it was too cold for a bird to sing out here in the swampland. There was just the crunch of my snowmobile boots breaking through snow, the hush of dead stuff shivering in the below-zero air. The rustling it made reminded me of great oak trees, of a worn California creek bank, and how I recalled that dead fish was an omen sent to me to tell me my father was about to go around the bend. After that walk, I was driven to the hospital. My mother beat the odds only to be wheeled back for a second surgery. Her heart was leaking. As I waited in the hallway, a gurney rushed, hurriedly pushed by 4 men dressed in scrubs, white as the sheet draping my mother's body, the color of going around the bend. I leaned my head into the chilled, slick black granite hospital wall for the kind of support I would learn to depend on. Hours later, a priest stood in front of me, and I said, "She died, didn't she?" Before he could say, "It was God's will." The priest's explanation later inspired me to write poetry and to drink scotch, while I wrote simple and straightforward verse like, "Fuck God," with burnt match tips on old paper, or sometimes when the material match glowed red on the inside of my creamy, smooth thigh. After my mother died, there was no moving van, Mayflower, or whatever to take our household goods to another state. Everything that wasn't taken or given away and smelled like home ended in storage. Our house sold. I moved on with little more than I could carry in a cardboard box and a suitcase. Folded inside the suitcase was a set of Tweety Bird sheets. For a year, I lived with my brother and sister with court-appointed legal guardians. When they suspected I knew they were embezzling from the entire state of 3 orphans in their care, they kicked us out. The 3 of us scattered. For a while, I lived in a double-wide with a junior high school friend, where I spent most of the 9th grade learning how to mix Singapore slings and pack a bong tight. When my extracurricular activities were discovered, I was placed with 2 foster parents as skewed as their motives for fostering me. Too much thinking back on all I'd gone through to get me to this mountainside, along with thirst, was keeping me awake. I sit just inside the tent flat, roll and suck another gumdrop snow of wad to dilute the dehydrated soup paste coating my tongue and throat. If I believed in an afterlife, I was sure my parents would be looking down at me, upright, my legs sticking straight out the tent flap, my old snowmobile boots covered in snow. Maybe they'd be impressed that I'd figured out how to buy this land, but then wonder, how could I be so dumb enough to eat freeze-dried soup? Or maybe they'd get all parent-like and yell loud enough I could hear them from Kingdom Come, "Take off those snowmobile boots and get back to bed." I'm too busy figuring out to dwell on any further possibilities of an afterlife. I do know for a fact, though, my parents are firmly grounded side by side in a cemetery above the Minnesota River. There is a spare family plot to the left of where they lie. I do not want to own this property willed to me. Cellophane-thin ice sheets cling to the nylon walls, brittle as my body when I wake. My snowmobile boots are filmed heel to snow and ice developing overnight. Cold won't move out of my limbs as I bend about a fire built from twigs that only smoke, and I shiver as I face my first day of work. I kick snow over a fire too stingy to eat enough water to dissolve instant coffee. Leaving the snowmobile boots to defrost inside the tent, I lace on a dry pair of leather Reikleys and hike down to the Gremlin with an empty pack. The Gremlin, remember my good old car, that green car? The Gremlin hood faces east, absorbing some of the morning sun. With some effort, the engine turns over, and in 5 minutes, with the heater on high, my disposition also warms. Twice, I reversed my decision from shifting the car into drive, as in to drive back to a place I left behind, where people live in proper houses that are always warm, even if the people are not. Instead, I waited out until the gas gauge drops low, time enough for me to chew a gorp from the luggage thawed from the bag in the gloved dashboard. The closest civilization is the city of John Day, 13 miles away. I know there are motels there with a shower and a telephone. The only connection I want to make is to hot water. But I must settle on the closest gratification and eat until the baggie of gorp is empty, and then refill the pack, hike up the mountain, and begin my first lesson in failing. On a hillside just above my camp, I select a tree, the criteria being it looks big enough to build a log cabin with, but no, not too intimidating as a first lesson. I place a stout branch over the top of a paperback to keep the pages open and cross-reference the guidebook until it is clear. I need help. Thank you for listening to Chapter 4. of Babe in the Woods, building a life one log at a time. We're going to keep you entertained. Please keep listening to my YouTube and Spotify channels. And that was kind of a heavy chapter, but it's true. And I got through it.